Namaste everyone. I am Dr. Rachana Bhangaokar and I welcome you to our symposium on moral development among Indian adults, insights from Indigenous psychology. All four presenters in this symposium are from the Department of Human Development and Family Studies, the Maharaja Sayaji Rao University of Baroda, India. The symposium includes 4 studies on varied facets of moral development in India, the need to examine indigenous worldviews using emic approaches, especially in less represented non-Western cultures, has been reiterated often. Such attempts are known to broaden the scope of moral psychology by developing stronger theories and varied methods in the discipline. The studies to be presented in this symposium have employed qualitative and quantitative methods, and results elucidate Indian moral concepts of karma, action, dharma, duty or responsibility, and trust in the divine in the forms of iman and shraddha through everyday life experiences, cultural practices, and belief structures. All studies bring forth unique aspects of moral development and self-conceptualization rooted in Indian cultural realities and religious spiritual worldviews. Together, the studies emphasize the necessity to understand the cultural situatedness and diversity of psychological knowledge to understand processes of human development. Before we move on to the presentations, I would like to thank you for your time and interest in our symposium.
Hello, I'm Niyati Pandya of the Maharaja Sayaji Rao University of Baroda, India, and I will be presenting Suffering and Self-Refinement, Moral Perspectives from a Hindu-Indian Worldview. The study of suffering in psychology has largely been dominated by a focus on aging, healthcare, and the biomedical perspective. These perspectives consider suffering to be beyond the realm of human action, responsibility, and control, thereby making it possible to treat or eliminate suffering through material interventions. However, contemporary moral psychology acknowledges the importance of plurality and the inclusion of culturally diverse forms of moral concepts. Additionally, there is a rising interest in indigenous psychology and its contributions to global psychology. There is a need to examine indigenous worldviews using emic approaches, especially of non-weird cultures, in order to broaden the scope of moral psychology. In the present study, we aim to address this lacuna by examining suffering from the perspective of the Hindu-Indian moral worldview. According to the Hindu worldview, dukkha or sorrow and tapa or suffering are an intrinsic part of human life. Suffering is classified into tapatraya, the 3 miseries, namely adhyatmika tapa, caused by bodily suffering and mental anguish, adhidevika tapa, caused by unseen forces such as one's fate or a deity or a demon, etc., and adhibhautika tapa, caused by other living beings such as wild animals or insects. Patanjali in Yoga Sutra regards klesha or disharmony as the primary source of suffering. The 5 kleshas are avidya or ignorance, asmita or egoism, raga or attraction, dvesha, repulsion, and abhinivesha, that is the lust for life. According to Hindu philosophy, the knowledge and acceptance of one's own suffering, along with an understanding of its origin and cause, helps to minimize the effect of suffering on an individual. Additionally, factors such as dharma, that is righteous conduct, detachment and impulse control, belief in rebirth and karma or deeds, and the belief in transcendence can help alleviate one's suffering. The aim of the present study was to examine adult moral discourse regarding suffering with a qualitative lens from the standpoint of the Hindu-Indian worldview. Participants were 30 adults from the city of Baroda, India. The sample represented the high socioeconomic class and was divided evenly between women and men. Participants were approached through a private English medium school in Baroda and by using the snowballing technique. All ethical considerations were ensured throughout the research process. An open-ended interview schedule was used to ask questions on ideas of suffering, and more specifically, the questions were as follows. All people suffer at some point in time. Why do you think there is suffering? Does suffering have a meaning or a purpose in life? And lastly, can suffering be eliminated? Probes were used to elicit comprehensive reasoning. Pilot tests were first conducted to ensure clarity and relevance of questions. Later, final interview schedule was used with participants being interviewed at a place and time convenient to them. Interviews were tape recorded, transcribed verbatim, and used for thematic analysis using Deduce, that is a software for qualitative data analysis. Verbatim responses from all major themes generated were culled from the interviews, and representative excerpts have been used to explain how adults spoke of suffering. Coming to the results of the study, these were the four major themes that were revealed through thematic analysis. First, sources of suffering. Participants were asked why people suffer. Responses highlighted three major reasons. They explained suffering as a direct consequence of one's bad karma or bad deeds. For example, one participant shared that suffering is the unfortunate result of bad deeds. If you do wrong, then at some point, in some way, you will have to bear the parinam or the consequence. Adults also spoke of the relationship between suffering and karma on a continuum of present, past, and future lives. That is, your bad karma or deeds from a previous birth could well be the reason for your suffering in the present or the future births. For example, one adult explained, we suffer based on our actions in the past life. If we did well in this life as a human, we will enjoy our next life. The fact that we take birth again is also a form of suffering. But it is all relative. It is better than being born as an animal, for example, or in more unfortunate circumstances. Lastly, adults spoke of suffering as a relational experience, where bad deeds of our ancestors, family, or friends could also influence one's suffering. And similarly, one's own deeds could influence others' suffering and the well-being of future generations. Adults spoke of four major forms of suffering. Referring to physical suffering, one participant shared that aging, for example, is a form of physical suffering because there comes a time in everyone's life when the body and mind gradually deteriorate. Responses highlighted the psycho-relational form of suffering. Speaking of how one's relations with others could influence one's emotional state, a participant explained, loneliness can be a punishment of sorts. It is very difficult when you don't have family or friends around you. You don't want to feel alone in this world. And sometimes you have your entire family living with you and you still suffer because you think that no one likes you or that no one understands you, if there is a lot of clash or disharmony within the family. Participants also discussed financial instability and the lack of basic resources as a potential form of suffering. A participant explained, not having enough money or a stable income can be very distressing. I would feel helpless if I cannot provide for my children and family. It would cause immense dukkha or sorrow and persistent guilt. Spiritual suffering was yet another form of suffering that featured in participant responses. For example, one adult participant said, bad deeds make us suffer spiritually. Our soul should not be degraded by adharmic or immoral actions, thoughts, and decisions. It is all taken forward in our future births. Adults asserted that suffering has an important meaning and purpose in life. More specifically, suffering is the prerequisite for the awareness and the experience of true happiness, understanding the differences between the good and bad, and also to appreciate life in its up and down. Here are two examples that illustrate this. Imagine no traffic jams on the road, no accidents at all. You will never need to wear glasses. You will never have fights and disappointments, and you won't ever get old or sick. If all this was possible, then that would be great. But it won't, because then you will have no experience of dukkha or sorrow and pida or pain. Suffering is key to the awareness and experience of ananda, that is perfect bliss. Another participant shared that there is a reason why life was created this way, to teach us how to appreciate the good and the bad in life. Life will be too boring and monotonous without the ups and downs. Suffering gives us the chance to change, to become better, wiser, stronger, and kinder. It gives us a chance to learn from our mistakes and experiences of all kinds, and therefore it makes life interesting. Most prominently, responses highlighted self-refinement as a major purpose, as well as an outcome of suffering. Suffering was seen as an opportunity for evolving one's own self. It acts like a catalyst for self-refinement and positive development. For example, one adult explained, "You learn a lot in the seemingly worst phases of life. You have a chance to reflect on yourself. What did I do wrong? What could I change in myself to do better? Who are the people who helped me, supported me in my darkest hour? Those are the people who cared for me, and so they should matter the most." Suffering therefore allows for deep introspection among adults, the acceptance of one's situation in life, and the pursuit of positive transformation. While there was unanimous agreement among participants about the demanding nature of suffering, there was also agreement that refinement was the only way to respond to suffering. Adults shared that there were no shortcuts to alleviate suffering. It was perceived as an ordeal and that everyone had to experience in some form or intensity. In that sense, suffering was seen as pervasive to the human experience, impossible to avoid, and in fact undesirable to eliminate because of its karmic nature. Instead, participants explained the pivotal role of sincerely performing one's dharma or righteous duty through good karma or deeds as a means of alleviating suffering and enhancing personal well-being, health, and happiness. To sum up, this is the model that emerged from adults' reasoning about suffering in the study. Coming to the conclusion, these findings contrast notably with the corpus of current literature on suffering. Results suggest that suffering was perceived as intrinsic to the human experience. Both happiness and suffering were considered essential to develop moral conscience and to lead a dharmic, responsibility-driven, duty-based life. It is seen as an ongoing transformative process for the self. Doing good karma and performing one's dharma or duty were crucial to alleviating suffering and to enhance well-being. Research addressing cultural plurality in the understanding and experience of suffering is lacking, and the present results suggest that future research could fruitfully include Indian samples. In conclusion, the present study broadens the scope of global psychology by presenting an indigenous perspective on suffering as endorsed by the Hindu Indian worldview and socialization. These are the references for my presentation. Thank you so much for your time and interest.
Hi, I'm Zoya Mohammadi, and I'm presenting on the transformative power of Iman, an experiential journey among late adults. The flow of my presentation is Introduction and Literature Review, Iman, Concept and Characteristics, Developmental Understanding of Iman, followed by Theoretical Foundation, Methodology, Results, Discussion, and References. The literal Arabic meaning of Iman is to believe, to trust someone, and to have confidence in someone, while the Quranic definition of Iman is to believe in Allah, the one and only God, His angels, His revealed books, God's messengers, the day of judgment, and destiny. In Islamic theology, Iman consists of three elements: the affirmation of the heart, with the confession of the tongue, and the actions of the limbs. Belief in the heart and confession by the tongue includes recognition, knowledge, and affirmation, along with commitment, voluntary submission, and acceptance. This affirmation and confession should be reflected in the behavior of an individual by performing acts of obedience and avoiding forbidden actions. Al Ghazali revealed three ways in which Iman of a person, depending on his or her belief, increases or decreases. 1. If the belief in the heart is by way of imitation, without any personal discovery, then it increases or decreases based on how tight or loose the knot of imitation is tied around the heart. 2. If there is belief and action, then increase or decrease depends on action. With regular prayers and good deeds like charity, there is increase in Iman. 3. If belief is by way of personal discovery, it is less likely to increase and differs based on the level of clarity and how assured the soul is. Al-Ghazali laid out three stages of development of Iman. First stage being birth to 7 years, wherein one can teach ethics to children by habituation of praiseworthy behaviors of how to eat and share food with other people. Second stage is 7 to 15 years, wherein children understand the difference between right and wrong and can understand when parents provide explanations of why children are encouraged to behave well and prohibited from behaving badly. During this stage, one should practice what has been learned, such as prayer, Ramadan fasting, and being kind to others. Third stage, 15 years and above, one already has the knowledge and understanding, and this knowledge and understanding should translate into commendable behavior habits, and the role of reasoning begins to disguise. Theoretical foundation, examining faith through the participant's narration of his or her life, relationships, values, commitments, and religiosity requires empathy on the part of the researcher towards the participant's experiences for the purpose of meaning making. In interpretive phenomenological approach, the researcher sees the world from within the lived experiences of participants, and the retrospective approach allows one to obtain a broader picture of development of Iman over the life course. The research objective is to examine the experiential understanding of Iman rooted in significant life events for 3 Muslim late adults. Method is participant-driven in-depth interviews wherein interpretation was cross-checked with the participants. The sample criteria was purposive homogeneous sampling, and participants were selected based on the range of transformative experiences and deeper understanding of Iman they had over their life course. 3 participants, 1 woman aged 58 residing in Hyderabad and 2 men aged 65 and 76 residing in Baroda belonging to Shia Suleimani Bora community were selected. Ethical considerations were taken, like auditory informed consent was taken, participants were debriefed about the nature and objectives of the study, and confidentiality of data and anonymity of participants was assured. Some of the questions asked to the participants were, how would you describe Iman? Has your Iman changed over time? Contrast the present experience of Iman with the experience you had as a young adult and a middle-aged adult. Have you ever had moments of intense joy or experienced times of challenges in your life that have affirmed or changed your sense of Iman? And whether your experience of Iman, whether you experience your Iman diminishing or growing, share your experiences. And how has the image of God and your relation to God changed across your life course? And who and what is God for you? Analysis, multiple reading and making notes, reading and rereading the transcripts and making notes about observations and reflections about the interview experience, and transforming those notes into emergent themes with core essence of what the participants expressed, followed by looking for connections between emerging themes, grouping them together according to conceptual similarities, listing themes and subthemes with short descriptions of each theme. These were the core themes: constituents of Iman, role of Iman in coping with challenges across the life course, changing understanding of Iman, and the image of God. The constituents of Iman, first, belief. Participants have described about the pillars of Iman, wherein Walayat and Namaz have been talked about more than others. Walayat means to believe in God's messengers, and Namaz, it is not just a practice or a way to worship. It is important to understand the deeper meaning behind reading Namaz and how it can bring changes within an individual. This understanding cannot be taught. At the right time, at the right place, it comes deep into the heart. Sabr, that is patient, and shukr, that is thankfulness, give you great willpower to take each day as it comes. Do not worry too much by allowing God to do what is best for you. That simple understanding that Islam gives solves a lot of problems like dissatisfaction with life, fear of what will happen tomorrow, because one leaves all worries to God and He takes care of them. There are many ways in which a Muslim should be, from as simple as to be honest, be kind, help others, do not hurt anyone, to praying 5 times, keeping roza, paying zakat, and believing in God's messengers. Second confession. Participants express that Iman is like the strongest pillar of support and is unshakable. It is not for a moment, but a process, and it comes through God. And once it comes, there's trust and acceptance, and one is at peace with oneself. Action. Once there's affirmation from the heart and confession from the tongue, it translates into action through practices of kindness and charity, in behaviors like honesty and loyalty. One is aware of one's own development and upliftment through good doings. One is conscious of the judgment day, that is Akhirat, and that the way one lives this life will affect the next life. Iman helps in coping with challenges across the life course, and challenges and sufferings can also be a starting point in inclining towards Iman. A participant narrated his story of how post marriage, due to family disputes, he had to move out with his wife and 2 small children with very few resources and finances. The struggle of setting up a new home and business, along with the emotional turmoil that he was undergoing, would have broken him inside out. But from questioning to why me, to thinking is that destiny, to introspecting, he found peace and strength in praying. Through acceptance and trust, he got inclined towards Allah, and by the grace of God, his business flourished, which also made him realize that although he had worked hard, but all this cannot be alone due to his efforts, and that there's a divine force guiding and helping him. Another participant shared that we face problems and challenges because God wants to test us and our iman. It is our imtihan, and one should be patient. So one should keep sabra and also shukr that this challenge, by facing this problem, I'll be able to cleanse myself and be free of wrongdoing and be a better person. Apart from crises, challenges, and sufferings being instrumental in leaning towards Iman, setting an example to young children by being a role model to follow and love religion was a double win for a participant, as she described it to be Sone Pe Suhaga. Also, having a balanced life is as important. The ability to balance between family, business, or worldly goals, along with devoting time to religious learnings, is important. As one of the aspects of Iman is also to take care of your family, be good to neighbors, and be kind to others. Changing understanding of Iman. For participants, faith was something emotional and hence difficult to rationalize and be exact about how and when it changed from being non existent to all encompassing. This change, although drastic, came along very slowly during instances when participants felt themselves in a dark place in their life and found great strength in praying. The nature of praying changed from blind faith during the start to a more meaningful and deeper understanding now. As shared by a participant, whenever my prayers are answered, it gives me a feeling of being understood and loved and appreciated by my outcome. Once your faith is deep enough, then your commitment and your iman become stronger and more steadfast. And because of the increasing age, you realize that materialistic world is of very little importance. You realize your purpose, as described by a participant. Every person should try to touch another person's life in a positive way, in such a way that the other person's life would be elevated and make the world a better place for the next generation. Once you start inclining towards Iman, one, there is a conscious effort to know God, His creation, and be able to place yourself in connection to all that exists. Through ilm, that is knowledge, by attending sabak, that is religious discourses, and with dialogues with elders in the family and community, one is able to grasp the deeper understanding of God, qualities of God, the guidance one gets, and God being the best and last resort when nothing helps. There is an aura created in our minds of what God is, but to bring it down into an image is a mistake because God is too big an entity beyond our understanding. We cannot see him, but he sees us. That insight comes with knowledge. With our sincere efforts to know, the right understanding comes to us, but only with God's mercy for us to know what we know. And although we cannot frame an image of God, once our Iman is strengthened and so is our understanding, there is a relation of trust and surrendering to somebody who is much higher power beyond our understanding. And the image keeps getting clearer with more and more understanding. The development of Iman is a dynamic lifelong process and strongly intertwined with moral challenges during one's life. Marriage, family disputes, worldly goals, migration pose challenges, especially during the adulthood years. With age, visits to religious places during Hajj and Umrah, elders' wisdom, better understanding prevails. When one realizes the purpose of life and is able to create a better world for the next generation by being a role model and setting the right context for young children, one is aware that he or she is a small part of the universe and that sabr and shukr can transform the way one navigates through life when faced with challenges. When one is accepting and trusting a greater being and leaving worries to him, with this development of Iman, one is blessed with the grace of God, and the divine power guides one to do something in the best way and attain perfection and excellence. And the person with this Pukta Iman will choose the right path, that is, Sirat Mustaqim ka Rasta, and will be content that whatever I'm getting is the best for me and will be able to benefit others rather than harm. And his or her wealth, position, knowledge, and physical abilities will be used to assist and benefit others. Discussion. Adulthood as a life stage is critical in terms of the kind of challenges one faces and could be a trigger to inclining towards Iman. As Iman helps get clarity in the way one operates, and there is commitment and excellence at any kind of work that one does. There is stability of decisions without intrusion of feelings of greed and fear. Iman impacts a person's thoughts, feelings, speech, and actions and gives hope at the time of despair, confidence, and willpower to face adversities. It helps in coping and adds to one's well being. South Asian Muslims constitute the largest regional and cultural group in the world of Islam and represent a distinct and liberal version of Islam which draws on particular characteristics of their geographical location and historical experience. Hence, there is a need to look at local, cultural, and actual practices of lived Islam. The concept of Iman can also be compared with similar concept across the religious and spiritual belief systems like Shraddha, since the context South Asian is multicultural and multi-religious. Further, how local, that is lived experiences, and the universal like textual is combined or contradicted in practice would be interesting to explore along with gender differences. These are my references. Thank you.
Hello, I am Anushri Gokhale from the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda, presenting on food, karma and sustainability in Indian modern universe. The study was funded by Center for Indigenous Stability, Indic Academy, Hyderabad. It was funded during the year 2020. Food reflects passion, belief, background and knowledge of a culture. Within Indian context, food can be representation of everyday moral order, dharma, and individual action, karma. At a cosmic level, it is a representation of divine, Anna Hai Purna Brahma. From the context of yoga, food practices are seen as a way to achieve self-discipline, and from the point of view of Ayurveda, food is seen as medicine. In Indian Hindu traditions, especially in Maharashtrian Brahmin traditions, food was used in sacrificial rituals. So great amount of attention was paid on following rules ensuring purity and hygiene during preparation and consumption of food. There was a great influence of karma on eating practices of Jains. So for Jain community, idea of food revolves around the idea of karma. Whole idea of what is eatable and what is not tends to revolve around the idea of karma. Karma is cyclic in nature, and any type of himsa or violence leads to binding of self to the cycle of life and death. Thus, one needs to minimize the potential violence caused through karma. Gandhi, politician, leader, activist, and a lawyer who played a major role in India's struggle for independence, had a central role of food in his life and politics. His ideas about food were inspired by Jainism. He looked at fasting as a way to purify body, self-abrogation, and political protest. He also promoted the conception of national food, the food that is common across all the classes, the food that provides minimum body needs and fosters bonds of solidarity and reciprocity. This solidarity was expressed through gestures of cooking and eating together. Gandhi looked at food as biomoral substance. It had a value beyond money. That's why he stressed more on ethical production and consumption of food. All these deeper values coexist with the historical context of feminines, colonial influence on food production, and food distribution post-independence, along with the existing effects of globalizing world that have created increase in prosperity and resulted into increase in dependency on professional help to get food and even making choice about the food. The objective of current study are to understand the context of food practices of Jain and Maharashtrian communities, to understand how mentalities influence the food practices of Jain and Maharashtrian communities, to understand the influence of food practices on the conception of self, and to understand change in food practices. Using grounded theory approach, in-depth interviews were conducted with 40 elderly, out of which 20 were Jains and 20 were Maharashtrians. Participants were asked to retrospect 40 years of their life and reflect on how their food habits have changed along their lifespan. Ethical considerations were taken while audio taping the interviews, and participants were debriefed about the studies, and confidentiality and anonymity of data was assured to the participants. For analysis, initial coding was followed by actual coding to generate thematic codes to be able to generate the conceptual maps which are presented in the results. Most of the participants, both Maharashtrian and Jains, were born and belonged to Gujarat, while some of them were from Maharashtra, and 2 of the Maharashtrian participants were from Madhya Pradesh. All the participants were roughly born between the year 1930 to year 1965. What food items were available in the given context guided the food choices of elderly. The context included the socio-economic factors like food distribution system, green revolution, along with greater geographic and climatic conditions that determined the crops cultivated during that time, expressed by participants as the paristhiti, the context. The social context of Maharashtrian and Jain communities interacted with economic and geographical context to form norms and rituals of fasting and making specific dishes on specific rituals and festivals. These festival specific dishes had climatic and geographical significance. Elderly grew up in large and extended families where disciplining and socializing techniques were present as sanskar that directly influenced their food practice. Elderly shared memories of having common meal times that served as norms. This common meal time served as opportunity to discipline children about food etiquettes and making children understand the value of food. Elderly narrated stories and of incidences from their childhood of how they were disciplined and how they disciplined their grandchildren or some children from neighborhood to eat everything and not to waste even a small portion of food. It is critical here to understand that these socialization practices or sanskar represent values and mentalities beneath them. From these contexts, food practices are not just product of mentalities, but are also their carriers. The further section focuses on understanding these values that guide and are also represented by these food practices. Food in Indian context is either considered to be grace of God or form of God, presented as Anna Hai Purna Brahma. The reason behind this respect towards food is it is fundamental to the existence of physical self, which is represented as Annamaya Kosha in Panchakosha theory. The Annamaya Kosha literally represents the part of self which is maintained by Anna or food. Understanding cooking and eating actions that can cause violence to different living organisms, causing karmic death, is imbibed in Jain belief system. So their actions aim to minimize the karmic death through their actions of consuming and producing food. Reverence was presented either towards food as it was form of divine or the process that made food available to elderly. This reverence and viewing food production and consumption as karma influences what one eats and how it is prepared and also how it is consumed. Adaptation is an important theme that came up with Maharashtrian participant where manage in whatever you have or don't find faults in food were the common verbatims present in almost all the interviews. Interestingly, one of the participants suggested this quality of accepting and adapting and not letting anything go waste is and should not be just limited to food practices, but it should also be extended to the way of life. Participants also expressed that one needs to understand the motive behind eating. Ideally, it should be the sustenance of body and not for appetizing the senses. Food is thus viewed as means to attain and sustain good health. This sentiment is expressed by Anna Angi Lagta, that is, food is digested well and thus it reaches its purpose. There is popular belief among participants that food needs to be consumed with joy. Only and only then good digestion happens. The joy is interconnected with the sense of contentment or santosh and eating in right balance or the praman. So when one eats with anand, joy, santosh, contentment, shanti, peace, and it right praman, balance, the proper digestion of food happens and which contributes to one's well-being. What is interesting is that the sense of detachment from the taste was highlighted by participants to be an important precursor to be able to consume food in right balance with contentment, peace, and with joy. Now we will see how food is central to the conception of self. Participants were asked about when and how they learned cooking. The gender difference emerged as a trigger to learn cooking. Women reported to have learned cooking either from young age or sometime around or after their marriages, while men learned cooking when they migrated to other cities to live alone for education or occupation. Learning cooking was one of the adaptive practices within household for women, while it was an adaptive practices at the workplace for men. Both men and women reported that it was duty of women to cook. Conceptualization of self as social entity made individuals generate a sense of community identity by having ideas of in-group and out-group, which were marked by specific food habits. Along with this, the interdependent self identity was reflected in food practices like community cooking for feast, showing love through feeding in the form of agraha, or using food as an instrument for social cohesion. Viewing self as the metaphysical being governed by karmic laws and having faith in Brahman, the supreme consciousness, are fundamental to Indian worldview. It is said that remembering divine while eating can be a sadhana or penance to one's experience of Brahma, the supreme consciousness, from Anna, the food. That's why food is equated to divine. These worldview result into values and practices. Viewing self as metaphysical entity thus encourages viewing production and consumption of food as karma, sadhana, penance, or yajna. The shift between food practices was seen in the form of increase in choices of the food and affects in change in disciplining strategy, which is presented in the following verbatim, where the participants said, earlier people earned less, so they had to know how to manage in least. There was just one earning member in the family. Whatever elders would cook, we would eat with contentment. Now, people can earn a lot, but there is no peace. Greed has increased. No one says no to anything. Earlier, if father would say no, no one would say anything. But now, children throw tantrums. Change was also seen in the form of increase in menu for the preparation of feast during the weddings. Which is presented in the following verbatim, where early 50 years ago, menu was smaller. 5 to 6 items were used to be there. It didn't have 15 to 20 items. Women at home and acharis or cooks used to cook then, and women were more involved then. And all this experience has led to the erosion of experience of love and sense of belongingness, which is presented that earlier in Pangats, which was a practice presented in the photo, where there was a practice of sitting down and dining, where host used to serve with love to all the guests. There was apulki, love or belongingness, which is not present today due to increasing commercialization, as reported by the participant. Participants also said that they earlier depended more on relatives, members of communities to cook for feast. Some of them also used to have acharis to manage major cooking, and all the raw material used to be provided to him, and women at home used to assist these acharis to cook meals at weddings. But later it got transitioned into exclusive dependence on catering services. So this highlights the movement from dependence on community and relationship towards the dependence on money and market. This also has an influence on the sense of belongingness or lagni. Elderly said that community practices maintained stronger cohesion, which was expressed as lagni or aplepana or love by the participants. Some of them also mentioned that now there is shift towards more commercialization, which has led to loosening of cohesion. So one needs to understand the value of food beyond money, and it is essential to understand how it is something that is fundamental to existence, and it is also critical to understand how deeper values about balance, acceptance, adaptation, sustainability, contentment, and gratitude towards resources that make our sustenance possible are reiterated in and practiced in everyday food habits. Thank you.
Hello, this is Rachana Bhangaokar, and I shall now be presenting two quantitative studies on the concept of karma that is rooted in the philosophy of Karma Yoga or the science of action. These studies were conducted with the co-authors listed on the slide. The idea of karma is a defining feature of Hindu Indian thought and selfhood. The term was first mentioned in the Rig Veda, the oldest Indian scripture, where Rita is cosmic order and karma, which originates from the root Sanskrit word kri, is the all-pervading cosmic law that governs action. The concept of karma in Hinduism has changed across historical era and has also been influenced by religions of Buddhism and Jainism. Karma has strong cultural relevance even today and is deeply connected with the ideas of dharma or rightful, righteous living, and both karma and dharma lie at the core of moral selfhood in India. Instead of reducing karma to mere rewards and punishments of human actions, the principles of Karma Yoga consider rewards and punishments to be valid avenues for moral growth. It is believed that selfless actions, Nishkama Karma, are the groundwork for receiving spiritual wisdom that eventually leads to spiritual freedom. The scriptures and oral traditions of India emphasize the achievement of stable selfhood or Naishkarmya Siddhi through selfless actions that are bereft of the feeling of doership and one is indifferent to the outcomes of one's actions. The ultimate aim of karmic action is to excel at fulfilling one's responsibilities to the best of one's capabilities and ultimately to bring people together for constructive systemic changes or lok samgrah. To put it very briefly, karma enables human freedom through the right attitude towards action. A morally evolved self is thus more important than any abstract idea of God delivering justice because in a karmic world, there is no uncertainty of outcomes. The nature of one's karma naturally determines its consequence in this birth or another. Numerous Indian scales and measures are now available to measure karma and its components. Indian studies have found a positive relationship between karma and workplace spirituality, karma and well-being, as well as leadership. Euro-American studies have also explored the idea of karma and have often used experimental studies to determine if belief in karma motivates pro-social actions. For this presentation, we focus on two recent scales, Krishnan and Mulla's scale, the Karma Yoga scale, that includes three subdomains of duty orientation, indifference to rewards, and equanimity. Navre's scale, which is used in the second study, has 5 subdomains, namely Manonigraha or control over one's senses or man, Samabuddhi or equanimity, Falashatyag or giving up the desire for fruits of one's actions, Swadharma or duties, and Lok Samgrah or collective action for greater good. Let us take a look at the results of 2 studies that have used these measures. Going over to study 1. This study had a sample of 240 adults from 2 states in India, Gujarat and Assam. Participants responded to 18-item Karma Yoga questionnaire with 3 subdomains that of duty orientation, indifference to rewards, and equanimity. The study included emerging adults between the ages of 18 to 25, established adults 25 to 40 years, and late adults 41 to 55 years. Both men and women were included in the sample, and it was expected that established and late adults would have completed graduation and would be employed for at least 3 years. The results of the study showed that established adults scored significantly more on both duty orientation and indifference towards rewards in comparison to emerging adults. Late adults scored significantly more than established and emerging adults only on equanimity. These findings imply that with increasing age and life experiences, along with related responsibilities at different life stages, the understanding of Karma Yoga deepens. No significant gender differences were found in this group. Going over to study 2. This study was conducted with 3 similar age groups only in the city of Vadodara using Navre's scale, which has 5 subdomains of Karma Yoga, namely Manonigraha, control over senses, Samabuddhi, equanimity, Falasha Tyag, giving up desire for the outcomes of one's actions, Swadharma, or inherent duties and responsibilities, and Lok Samgraha, or collective action. Results revealed a significant difference on Manonigraha, or control over senses, where men scored significantly lower than women on this aspect, and this gender difference was quite significant. The same subdomain also showed significant differences between age groups. The post hoc test showed that emerging adults scored significantly higher than established adults, and established adults scored significantly higher on Manonigraha than late adults. This was a surprising result, as the youngest and the oldest groups were lower in terms of controls or Manonigraha. The correlations between the subdomains of the Karma Yoga scales revealed equanimity or Samabuddhi to be strongly correlated with Manonigraha, or control over senses, and indifference to rewards and punishments. Likewise, awareness of one's duty or Swadharma was strongly correlated to Lok Samgraha, or collective action for greater good. These correlations make perfect theoretical sense when it comes to the concept of Karma Yoga. The understanding of karmic attitudes and principles is moderated by age and gendered experiences, which are embedded in a particular cultural context. Future studies could explore the applications of Karma Yoga in varied spheres of life, especially family life, volunteerism, and communal living or community service. Implications of belief in karma on well-being and self-refinement or self-improvement can also be explored. There is potential to understand the principles of Karma Yoga in the right sense across different cultures also. Overall, from an Indian worldview, belief in karma can promote a dharmic way of life or a righteous way of life. These are some of our references. Thank you very much for your time and interest in our symposium. I hope the studies could generate interest in Indian ideas of karma and ways of cultural living woven around it. We look forward to your questions, comments, and feedback on these presentations. We will be happy to connect with you for few further discussions. Thank you.